lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall not fear, because you are with me. Maybe God is love. I mean, could it be that simple for me? You hear it all the time, God is love. Okay, God is love. God is a force of love. God is a force of love in the universe. When I was in high school at Marycliff, the Catholic girls' school, there was this lay teacher who taught PE named Ms. Roberts, and she was gorgeous. She walked like an athlete, her head held high. She was tall and blonde and muscular, a goddess in our midst. One day, the nuns had all of us girls in the gym, and we were sitting on the floor listening to this guest musician, who I think may have been a friend of Ms. Roberts, and he was playing his guitar and singing. And at the end of his set, he began singing this song, Vatican Rag, which is very irreverent and has lyrics like, bow your head with great respect, and then genuflect, genuflect, genuflect. Well, the nuns reeled. Sister Mary Howard stood up in the middle of his song and asked him to leave. He stopped, took his guitar, and left. Then I remember just sitting there in the gym for a while, just sort of decompressing, just talking about God. When all of a sudden, Sister Mary Howard turned to this Miss Roberts and said, do you even believe in God? Well, I'd never heard anyone ask another person a question like that before. Ms. Roberts stared right into the eyes of Sister Mary Howard, and Sister Mary Howard stared right into the eyes of Ms. Roberts, who after an eternity said, I believe in a force of love in the universe. All of us girls nodded in agreement. Force of love in the universe? I mean, sure, who could argue with that? And then we all looked back at Sister Mary Howard, whose eyes narrowed, like, that is the wrong answer. Only 2 years later, the attitude of my church towards God being simply love had completely changed. Gonzaga Prep, the Catholic boys' school, had gone co-ed, and that's where I spent my last 2 years of high school. Everything seemed to be changing. Folk masses were slipping into the mainstream. Some of the priests used chalices made of thick, handmade pottery, and their vestments were made out of unbleached fabrics, coarsely woven. And instead of the pre-made communion wafers, we all just started breaking a loaf of bread into little pieces, like Jesus did. In the spring, Father Fitterer started teaching us all transcendental meditation. Suddenly, there were guitars in mass and a drum set right up on the altar. Transubstantiation was never like this before. In my senior year of high school, they had us all go on this special retreat called a search, and they took us off to this retreat house for a couple of days up in the mountains, and they put these big blankets over the windows so we didn't know what time it was, and then they didn't let us sleep for 2 entire days. And of course, everyone kept breaking down and crying, saying, God is love! God is love! Only we were actually saying, Fred is love, Fred is love. Because they asked us to call God Fred instead of God while we were on the retreat. Because they felt the name God was just too off-putting for so many people, and Fred just felt so much friendlier. So we were saying, Fred is love. I am walking on Fred's path. I remember after the search, all of us seniors were going back to school in this bus down these really scary, winding switchback roads. And another senior, Larry, who a few years later would leave the Catholic Church to become an evangelical Christian, turned to me with this big beatific grin on his face and he said, just think, if this bus got into a big accident right now, we were all killed, we'd all probably go straight up to heaven. And we all nodded like, yeah, our souls are so clean and pure at this moment. How wonderful would it be if we were all killed in a big bus accident right now? Because we'd all fly straight up to Fred! This is how I danced in high school. I didn't really date in high school. So here I was, years and years later, saying God is love again myself. But what did I mean exactly? I decided I would think more about this whole idea of God being love, the feeling of love. Did I think there was a God behind it? Or in it? I mean, there seemed to be a lot of incentive to feel love just for its own sake. Without God, would there be no love? In my confusion, I found someone who made it clear, someone who had thought about this topic a lot. Now, at this point, I knew a little bit of science, but not a lot, and that made me the perfect candidate for Deepak Chopra. I read The Way of the Wizard, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, The Quantum Alternative to Growing Old, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, and How to Know God. I basked my way through Deepak's books. I thought, I get it. God is energy and intention in the quantum field or something. Deepak says that by perceiving changelessness, time ceases to exist. I love Deepak. I did an interview on The View on ABC, and Deepak Chopra also happened to be a guest on the exact same show, and I gushed all over him in the green room, telling him how wonderful he was. I did notice that he looked a little older than he looked on his book jacket, and I wondered if his perceived timelessness was working on his own body. I told him how his books were helping me understand what and who God was, what ultimate reality was, and also, I just had to tell him that I appreciated that he also had books about how to create spontaneous wealth and how to lose weight. Deepak says, the world is the creation of the observer, and the body is information and energy spanning the universe. Consciousness is the ground of all being. It created us, and we are part of it. Deepak believes that we can tap into this big consciousness with our awareness, and that it is the source of all creativity and intention and synchronicity. And if you want proof, well, the exotic field of quantum mechanics proves all of it. I was really enthralled with how Deepak was using science, the cutting-edge science of quantum mechanics. This was so much better than using myths and superstitions to find spirituality. I mean, this was using physics and science to find spirituality. I was so intrigued with this quantum mechanics that Deepak refers to over and over and over again in his books that I decided I would take a class in it. And what I found is that Deepak Chopra is full of shit. Oh. I wanted to go back in time, and instead of gushing at Chopra, I wanted to say, Deepak, what the hell are you doing? There is no universal consciousness that can be demonstrated with quantum mechanics. There is no healing of the body or arresting of the aging process through telepathy. I mean, sure, subatomic waves and particles do behave in perplexing and strange ways to us, especially when we try to measure them, apparently. But that doesn't mean that there are angels or that the universe wants me in particular to make more money. I mean, I know this, and I took one measly class. I turned on the TV one day to find Deepak back on his beloved show, The View, promoting his new book, Golfing to Enlightenment. And all the ladies were so thrilled. Who knew you could achieve enlightenment on the links? I started feeling so angry at the New Age movement, so arrogant, so clueless. I mean, here was the generation that was supposed to be the best educated, the ones who threw off the shackles of superstition and traditional religion, and then what did they do? They just gravitated towards chakras and auras and crystals and quantum consciousness. I mean, what is the matter with people? And then I thought, oh, God, what is happening to me? I'm becoming so cantankerous. I'm going to become one of those angry retired people who just keeps writing letters to the editor. And I realized that the class I took didn't just give me a very rudimentary understanding of the very basics of quantum mechanics. I actually learned something much more deeply disturbing about myself, which was I'd never really been taught critical thinking skills before. I never really considered how to evaluate evidence. I always thought that being smart meant that you knew a lot of things, or that you did what the teacher told you to do really, really well. Not that you had this mechanism for filtering information. Plus, the truth was, I was starting to get nervous about my relationship with God. I felt like we were this married couple in trouble, just trying to find some common ground. I began to wonder just who I was married to. How defined did it really need to be for me? Because the truth was, God worked for me. William James said, it doesn't work because it's true because it works. When I prayed, I felt calmer, more focused. It really changed my state of mind. But just because the idea of God worked so well for me, it didn't necessarily mean that he existed. I felt suspicious.